All right, you guys, welcome to another episode. So today we have a guest on. His name is Kyle Ruth. We have a fellow Kyle. at one at one point in time, when I was training back with a think tank in the gym, there were like 5 Kyles in the gym. It was always like a running joke of how many more Kyles can we add in. But I'm super glad I have him on today because Kyle is genuinely an excellent, probably one of the best coaches you'll ever find. He's extremely intelligent when it comes to understanding physiology, understanding training methodology, understanding the mindset. Like, he's just really, really great. So I'm excited for him to share what he's learned. We just talked about a second ago, over the 20 years of coaching and competing and all of it. And he just PR'd his clean at 39 years old at 380, which is bonkers. Like, that's not supposed to happen. So we're gonna dive into all of it today. I'll stop talking. Kyle, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, man, and just give us the little quick little rundown.
Yeah, I don't know if at 40 I can give a quick rundown, because 40
I
is a
know.
lot of years, of doing stuff to try and encapsulate into one thing. But I'll do my best to keep it concise. Um, so currently I'm a coach with Training Think Tank. I have been coaching in the strength and conditioning world for 20 years. It feels a little weird to say that, but I started my first strength and conditioning and personal training stuff when I was 20, and I turned 40 very shortly. So it's been a very, very long and windy and unexpected journey to get to this point. So that's where I'm at now. I'm also a competitor. I've continued to compete in CrossFit since I started competing in 2011. So 14 years of
Yeah.
CrossFit competition as well. So I've been doing this for a really long time. I was a team games athlete, individual masters games athlete. I missed the CrossFit games by a point in 2013, which still stings a little bit 12
Yeah.
years later to say that. But so yeah, I've been around the block on this. And then prior to CrossFit, I was a competitive swimmer. I swam collegiately. I swam, nationals, world championship trials. Like I swam as high as you can get without going to the Olympic trials. And I did it for a long time.
Yeah.
I swam till I was 25 or 26 years old. So I swam post grad, and just kept trying to like tick over to the Olympic trials. But I swam college, and then I started coaching myself. Like, I wanted to see what I could do when I took over the reins, and I was a sprinter. I was a sprint swimmer, so I swam 50 freestyle, 100 butterfly. So it's just a very different type of training. When people envision swimmers, they think of like the Michael Phelps putting in, you know, 9,000, 10,000 meters per day,
Yeah.
right? And that wasn't how, especially for the last like 5 years or so of training, that's not how I trained. It was much more plyometrics in the gym, like, sprints outside of the gym, sprints in the water. We had these cool devices where you could like sprint against resistance and stuff. So it was,
Oh, wow.
it was something, rather than me just like going in and grinding, putting laps in, I was able to keep doing it because it was still fun,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
there were aspects of it that were still fun. So yeah, that's how I arrived here. I mean, like, if we go through swimming achievements, I think I still have some state records from when I was
Nice.
younger than 100 butterfly. Like, I've done a lot in a lot of different domains.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, hopefully that like doesn't even cover any of it. I have a master's in exercise physiology, and I spent a bunch of time at IU studying in the Councilman Center for Swimming Science, which is like the last of the sport performance programs. At least it was when I graduated in 2010. My God, that seems so long ago. When I finished my master's in 2010, it was like the last of the sports performance like master's degrees, and luckily they're still going and still getting funding and stuff. But yeah, hopefully that covers everything.
No, it definitely does. Yeah. So, okay. So this is totally off topic, but I want to know selfishly, because I'll be 32 in like 2 weeks, which is actually, it's crazy for me to even say that. How does it feel approaching 40, or like, when do you turn 40?
June, very shortly.
Okay. So you got a few months to turn 40. How does it feel mentally, and how do you feel physically? Because I know we
Okay.
talked about you just PRing your clean, which
Yeah.
is crazy. So you must feel good to some extent, but I'm
Yeah.
curious what that balance is like for you.
Well, I balance is a good word. And I think that I've really tried to create balance by letting myself have like cycles, by letting myself have periods. And you probably saw this when you're at TTT, where I'd be like in the gym all the time, and then there'd be periods where you wouldn't see me. Like maybe I'd be in once a month, right?
Yeah,
And granted, I have my own training space here that I've created at my house, which is part of, I think, the whole concept of balance. But I feel pretty good physically. I will say that as I've gotten older, man, I've had just some weird health stuff pop up that like I'm like having old man health problems. Like I dealt with GERD, with like acid reflux last year. And
wow,
so like such a strange thing. I'm like I feel healthy, I'm fit, you know, and all this stuff. And turns out I had to overhaul my diet. I was eating you know, baked ziti on a really consistent basis to fuel training. And it turns out that like I can't eat that much tomato sauce, for example. Like among other things, like I figured out that like garlic is something that just affects me. So like I've had weird things like that. I had
yeah,
a melanoma taken off my ear last, so I guess that would have been 20, was that 23? Yeah, it would have been 2023. So like as I'm approaching 40, I'm getting old man things happening to me.
yeah,
But what's really interesting is like I don't feel it. Like in the gym, my joints feel so healthy. I can run, I can sprint, I can jump. My vertical jump is basically the same as it was when I was, you know, a 25-year-old.
wow,
I'm able, I had convinced myself when I turned 35 that I was never going to set another lifetime PR, strength PR again. I had been on, you know, the Corpus Animus podcast and talked about it, about how you know, oh well, I'm 35 now, so now I just like I've reset and like these are masters PRs and things like that. Um, but I've gone, I think I set 11 different strength PRs from like December of 2023 through 2024,
wow.
from shoulder press, back squat, deadlift, front squat 4RM, snatch PR 287, clean at 380.
That's
I couldn't
crazy.
PR my jerk. I've jerked 392 and I couldn't get back over like 375, but
I mean,
across the board
392 is so
stronger in
light.
basically every lift. So and you know, we did that. So this is a different story, but I basically was like at the beginning of last season around December, I was like, Adam, I know I have the potential to be one of the strongest competitors in the 35 to 39 division. And I was like, I'm tired of not winning strength events. So like, let's do a strength cycle and see what we can put together. And it was
Yeah,
crazy. It was like within 4 or 6 weeks, the PR started with the shoulder press. And I was like, dang, that was like a 5 pound. I think I shoulder pressed 220. I was
that's
like,
incredible.
at the time I weighed like 208, and I was like, dude, I'm a 200-pound over body weight shoulder presser now. Like, where'd this come from?
Yeah,
Um, and they just started rolling in shortly after that. So it was like, you know, we focused on it. We pulled back. It was the most I've ever pulled back in conditioning. I'm not the most enduring athlete. I mean, I was a sprint swimmer. Like, I'm not the most enduring athlete naturally, and so it takes a lot of endurance work for me. But when we pull back, man, I got really strong really
yeah.
fast. It was like it had all been waiting to come out.
Well, that was okay. So yeah, that was gonna be my follow up question. Is like, what do you attribute it to? Do you attribute it more to mindset? Do you attribute it to cutting back on conditioning? Like, what do you think it was?
Yeah, I think, well, they're two sides of the same coin, right? So it's like I shifted my mindset from I'm never going to set another lifetime PR, especially in Olympic lifts and things like that. Like you just don't do that at 40 when you have such a long training history. And that was the narrative I told myself all the time. My story was, you know, I'm a master's athlete, so I'm never going to hit these PRs. But we just decided, oh, it's like it's been too long since I've run a squat cycle. It's been too long since we've done I'd never run a squat cycle since I hired Max in 2013, and we tested my back squat and I hit 455 for a easy single in 2013. I've never been on a squat cycle from that
Really?
point all the way through. So this was the first structured squat cycle that I have been on since I was a CrossFitter.
Wow,
And I mean, it was so fast. Like, I think initial testing 415 was a heavy back squat, and I finished and hit 475.
wow.
And 25-pound lifetime PR, but I don't think it's technically like really a lifetime PR. You know what I mean? Like there are probably times that I could have squatted heavier than that.
I
It's
see what you're
just
saying.
it's the only
Yeah.
time that any coach has ever been like, it is time to test a 1RM. And like
Yeah.
I went out and did it. But yeah, I think that was a big part was pulling back um, some of the conditioning work to just to let me recover between the strength sessions. Um, just embracing the fact that I was going to do a true strength cycle and then mentally just getting past the idea that like, hey, you're old, you're not supposed to get stronger, and just accepting like, hey, you're going to get whatever you get out of this. And
Hmm.
so, go put the work in and see what comes out of this cycle and don't put any limits on it.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of it. The other advantage is I was we had a really good on-site training environment last year. And I was training with Matt Gilpin, who had just moved from Australia. And Gilpin and I, we just kind of hit it off, and like he needed to get a lot stronger. I was trying to get stronger, even though I probably didn't need to get that much stronger competitively for CrossFit. And it
Yeah.
was just like we just went at it. Our Monday and Wednesday sessions were tough strength sessions. We pushed each other hard, and that was the result. It was
That's
pretty
awesome.
crazy to watch all that happen. I'll also say coming back from that and trying to rebuild capacity for CrossFit was actually really challenging. I
Uh,
gained probably 10 pounds over the course of that 2.5 month training block, and
yeah.
like 24.1, which was the dumbbell snatch lateral burpee over the dumbbell workout, was so much harder. I normally sit around 200 pounds and I was weighing like 210, 212. And I was like, my God, what have I done? Like, this is
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. No, I bet it was. How did you feel while you were? Were you able to? I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this. Were you able to recover pretty well, being that now you're like 39? Like, has that slowed down at all? Have you noticed that? Do you have to be more conscious of like what you do before and after workouts and things like that?
Yeah, you know the little tweaks and like little nags that you get where like your elbow hurts and it lasts for like a month when you're 30. When you're 39 about to be 40, those things last for like 6 months. So you have to be very very cognizant of recovery, and that's one of the things I did notice is that by by the end of that cycle my knees were for the first time in a long time starting to get pretty achy. I had a
Yeah.
spot on the left side of my lower back. It wasn't like a sharp pain or anything. It was just a constant. Anytime I was standing, it was this constant just nag. And I knew it was time to be done with that strength cycle. At least for me, I'm not a power lifter, so it's not like I was just pursuing huge numbers for the sake of pursuing huge numbers. I knew it was time to shift focus a little bit and let my body recover a bit. And that's kind of what I was talking about with like the
Yeah.
cycles of like I let myself kind of swing the pendulum towards that strength end, and then I knew I could feel it was time to bring it back. And honestly, I feel much healthier, and I'm sure you feel this way too, when I have a better blend of conditioning and strength work with a good dose of gymnastics work. Like that's when I feel healthiest,
Yeah.
when I've got some balance in training. And once all of that got balanced back out, the little nags and stuff started to go away. Although the elbow lasts, so about the it's rope climber's elbow. That thing
Dude,
lasted so long, Kyle. So long.
you talking about like right here, on the
Oh yeah,
inside?
right on the
Yeah.
inside of
Oh,
the elbow, right there. So bad.
dude, it, it
Lasts
it
forever.
it just like it just won't go away. You're like, what do I
Yeah.
do?
Yeah. You know what I found? I took time off. After the games, after the Masters games this past year, I took time off, and I didn't touch a rope climb for a long time. Again, it's one of those things where it's, it's weird being this deep into a sport, 14 years into a sport. I cannot do a movement. Like I haven't done a muscle up in probably 3 months, and I just did a bunch of sets of six yesterday, and they felt fantastic,
Yeah.
right? And that's the beauty of having done something for 14 consistently for 14 years and really built it up to a high level, is that like the skills don't go away, and as long as you maintain some strength, you can
Yeah.
still express those skills. Like maybe not at the same level that I could have when I was like peaked for the games this past year, but they're still pretty good.
Yeah. No, I've definitely noticed that because I haven't competed now legitimately, and I think this will be my fourth year. But and I took a significant amount of time off from doing like really hard gymnastics stuff just because for whatever reason, when I would always do a ton of capacity, my shoulders would get tweaked. And so I just decided I'm going to do strict pulling for a while and just not mess with it. But whenever I would jump back into like a hard workout that had muscle ups and whatever, it was fine. It was like I
Yeah.
never even left. And it was like as long
Yep.
as I just stayed strong and decently conditioned, like it was there. But it was from a large foundation, which I think is the key for people to hear. It's like you got to put time in for you got to go through a grind and kind of build up the ability to take some time off and then step back into it.
Yeah, that's earned, right? The ability to step away and come back and still feel decent is earned by building, like you called it, a really big foundation.
Yeah, yeah, you got to just spend years of suffering. I mean, it's really what it is, like just constantly going through pain over and over. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so I want to actually ask about this. How do you help? Because I think there's an important differentiator, but for people who like, especially my audience, to understand the difference between like training to compete and just training to be healthy, and understanding that like at times, like you just mentioned, you feel healthiest when you're doing a good mix of things, but at times it's like, hey, if you want to really get better at this, you're gonna have to kind of lean into like not feeling good and it feeling like legitimately painful, like tweaks in your shoulder or whatever. It's like you're gonna have to lean into that a little bit. But then, so I think it's important for people to understand the differentiating between. And how do you help people see that and make decisions on like when it's time to push and not push?
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that people have a tendency to idolize the way that athletes train, right? They look at athletes and they're like, oh, they're healthy. Look how fit they are. Because people they confuse healthy and fit. Now, you have to be relatively fit to be healthy, but prioritizing fitness over everything else can sometimes deteriorate your health. We've anybody who's been in the high level CrossFit scene for a long time have seen this, where people
100%.
either are driving cortisol, like stress hormones, through the roof with just over constant overtraining, and they create all kinds of health problems for themselves, or
Yeah.
fueling themselves for performance all the time. They're eating 600 plus grams of carbs per day, right? And then they get their blood work done after 4 years and they're like, oh man, my lipid levels are out of whack and I'm only 28. And it's like, well, yeah, you're eating 600 grams of carbohydrates per day. Like
Yeah.
those, but in the end, if you want to be a high performance athlete, those things are necessary, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that that's necessarily a good thing for you from a health perspective. And so I think it's important for people to realize that there is a significant difference between training for health and training for optimal performance, because
Yeah.
they're not the same thing. Now, you have to be pretty healthy to have optimal performance, but trying to optimize health versus optimizing performance is just a different thing. In fact, I was just talking to my wife Haley about when I felt the healthiest in recent memory, and what we were doing at the time. We were doing the TTT Ruck challenge,
Oh yeah.
where we had about a 12-week block that we were all training to do this 12-mile ruck, with the goal of completing it under 3 hours. And we were supposed to have 35 pounds. I did it at 43. Like, I don't know. It just didn't eat. Should not have done that. It was like a massive mistake. Regardless, during the training, basically what I did is Monday, I followed TTT Compete, which was typically, if I remember the cycle correctly, it was like a heavy thruster, some front squat work, a very brief metcon, and some accessory work. So very strength oriented day. And then Tuesday, we did some long rucking, but it was just walking ruck, right?
Yeah.
We weren't running at any point in that. And we might ruck an hour and a half, might ruck 2 hours. I don't remember exactly how the cycle, but it's 35-pound ruck for an hour and a half to 2 hours. Wednesday, very strength oriented, probably hinge based, maybe some jerks or some pressing, some accessory work, and then a very brief metcon, right? Or maybe an EMOM or some intervals. And then Thursday would be off. Friday would be another strength oriented day. And then Saturday, I would do a long run. And then Sunday would just be kind of ruck interval day.
Yeah.
And so basically, I had three heavy or heavy-ish strength days, I was actually dropped all my percentages a little bit during the cycle because we
Yeah,
were
I was
trying to
gonna say.
get stronger. So I dropped the percentages on everything and took the strength work a little bit easier. Only had those 3 doses of intensity throughout the week, the 3 little Metcon intensity pieces, and then a long ruck, a long easy run, and literally I mean an easy run, like heart rate under 145 beats per minute
Yeah,
run, and then one more ruck interval day that might be a mix of like run walk, but even then when you're practicing for a super long ruck, you're not trying to get your heart rate to like 170 and keep it
yeah,
there.
no,
It's like little bursts of intensity at most. So it was like there was really just 3 days of intensity and 2 day or 3 days of long, easy rucking. And that's when my knees felt the best, my back felt the best. Like I felt super healthy and it felt very balanced, right?
yeah,
But I think if I were gonna try to create a program for someone that's trying to achieve optimal health, would probably take out some of the Olympic weightlifting. Doesn't seem very necessary. Maybe we might do metcons, but they would be very basic. Like you wouldn't be snatching and things like that. It would be
right,
like kettlebell, dumbbell work, burpees, some body weight stuff, maybe some of the ergs. And then it would basically be like a bodybuilding structure, maybe a little bit of powerlifting mixed in there, plus that conditioning work, and then whatever accessory, and then it would be a low intensity day. Maybe rucks, maybe running, maybe long walking, something like that. They'd be moving almost every single day,
yeah,
but the intensity would be reduced and it would be a good mix of strength training, a little bit of doses of intensity because you still need that. You got it. I
yeah,
mean, if you look at the research on like long-term health and sprinting is like one of the most potent anti-cancer tools that exists. It
crazy.
turns over my like kills old unhealthy mitochondria, stimulates the growth of new healthy mitochondria, which is super important for cellular health. It
Yep,
increases natural killer cells, which circulate the body and literally find cancer and tumor cells and kills them. Like you have to sprint, you have
yeah,
to have intensity. You just can't do it the way that a CrossFitter does, do it every single day and
right.
be healthy.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm glad you said that, dude. I think sprinting, I think like legitimately going outside and sprinting, like running, I think that's one of the best things you can do. And if you can maintain it your entire career, it's super, because you lose it after a while. Like
Yeah.
you can get it back, but you can't jump right back into sprinting. That's probably like the one thing you cannot just jump right into if you've taken a significant amount of time off. Like people
Oh,
pop their
hamstrings.
hamstrings, whatever. Like
Yeah.
it's gonna happen. But
Yeah.
man, sprinting, I felt like I was in the best shape. Legitimately, I felt like I was in the best shape when I was running track in high school. I was lifting weights and we were doing sprint intervals all the time 200s, 400s, 100s, 300s. And I felt like I was in such, those only workouts I ever threw up from, too. Like they were just nasty. They were
Yeah.
nasty. But man, like you just, it's such a potent stimulus on the body. But to your point, it's not something that you can do all the time forever. You can, but it's not good.
I just posted something recently. I've been doing this research review on my Instagram where I've been posting some of my favorite research studies that I've read in probably the last like 4 years. And one of them looked at, and this is such a cool meta analysis that they did. They looked at endurance training, so like long, slow, steady state training. They looked at hit intervals, so intervals that were over 90 seconds in duration, up to about 4 minutes in duration. So high intensity intervals that were at like high intensity but not maximal intensity, right? With work to rest that's less than 1 to 1. So if you do doing 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off, that would be hit. And then they looked at sprint intervals, which would be like 4 seconds to 90 seconds at maximal or near maximal intensity with 1 to 1 work to rest or greater. So if you're sprinting for 4 seconds, you might be resting for a minute, right?
Right.
Just think about that. On the bike, 4 seconds and then rest.
Yep.
They looked at each of those, and what they were able to do is quantify the the amount of physiological adaptation that you get from each of those for each minute spent in a training session. And sprint interval training was 2.5 times more effective at driving physiological adaptations than hit training, and 3.9 times more effective than long, slow endurance training. So if you
Wow.
think about that, 1 minute spent in a sprint interval session was worth 3.9 minutes of long, slow distance, which means a 10-minute sprint interval session is worth 39 minutes of endurance training. And
That's
that's not work time, right? That's just the total session. So a 10-minute session of 10-second sprint, 50 seconds rest is worth 3.9 times that long, slow endurance work. It
wow.
truly is the most potent training that you can do.
That's incredible. That's an interesting differentiator too. It's not even work spent. Like you don't have to accumulate 10 minutes worth of sprinting in order for it to be that beneficial. It's just the actual session.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
I know. So that informed my I've been doing this research review about things that have informed my coaching, right? And that informed my coaching in the sense that like, if I have a professional CrossFit athlete who has 6 hours to train per day, it doesn't matter that much. They don't have to worry that much about efficiency in training because across a week, they've got 30 hours to train. So we can kind of do what they need to do. But then I think about the people that I coach that are more general pop. They want to maybe be competitive or they want to be really fit. They want to
Yeah.
feel really fit, but they have 45 minutes per day, 4 days per week. And I'm like, how do I maximize this 45 minutes per day, 4 days a week for this person? And really, it comes down to picking the most potent training tools. And that's like moderate load, moderate volume, strength training, sprint interval training, making sure that there's a flexibility component built into some of the strength training. So, like, using people call it functional bodybuilding, whatever you want to call it, but incorporating balanced flexibility into the accessory training. So that might be
So,
like
Cossack
single leg
squats.
landmine RDLs or Cossack squat. Yeah, that's a great example. I see you post about this kind of stuff all the
Love it.
time, right? It's super important. So like maximizing your use of time with sprinting, moderate to heavy load resistance training, and then really effective uh, functional bodybuilding, functional training. And I think for someone who's looking for optimal health, it's those three things plus your low intensity days, getting your steps in. I like to do it with a ruck. So again, talking about efficiency, since we're on this topic,
Yeah.
I just saw a recent study where they looked at rucking. And when you I don't remember what percentage of your body weight it was. I want to say 15% of your body weight on and ruck, it increases calorie expenditure for the same duration and same total number of steps by a factor of 4.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, that was really another eye opener. It's like, well, hey, that's why you felt so healthy and so good when you were doing that ruck training because an hour and a half of ruck would be, according to that, it's like the equivalent of like 4 hours of just walking.
Yeah, no, that's a really good hack for people out there listening. It's like if you can just even just like throw a weight vest on, maybe it's not 15%, but it's just some sort of added load, like and just go for a walk. And because walking is so sustainable, like telling someone to
Yeah.
put weight on and go for a walk, it's way less intimidating than like, hey, we're gonna go run or do sprint intervals with this or whatever. And that's an easy hack for people. It's like just put a vest on during your workday, hop on some phone calls and go for a walk and just burn some calories in addition to your training.
So for my wife Haley, she did the ruck challenge with me, and that was a great thing to get us out and like doing stuff together. I kind of miss it, honestly. Um, but she turned that into training for a half marathon.
Yeah.
We got done with that ruck challenge, and she was like, "Well, I just rucked, 12 miles with 30 pounds or 30. I don't remember. I think she had 30 pounds on my back, and like we ran the downhills like I was fine. I want to turn this into running." And she said that starting like with the long, easy runs and stuff was so easy
Yeah.
after putting in that ruck work. She was like,
Yeah.
there was no transition phase where I felt terrible and she's always hated running,
Yeah.
like forever hated running. But after that ruck cycle, it had been easy. And then she went into a half marathon and now she does high rocks competitively. Like
Yeah.
she turned it into a thing. You know what I
That's
mean? So
cool.
like
That's cool.
there's something to be said for, I know I keep harping on rucking, but there's something to be said for that if as like a gateway drug to running.
100%. Do you think so? I've got two questions, two follow up questions. First question is back to the sprint intervals. Does that same principle of it being the most potent potent thing on your physiology, does that apply to weightlifting if you were to do like like a set of 3 front squats, let's just say at like 80%, but like max effort, down, up, down, up, down, up. Does that still apply there or not quite?
So that's not going to apply necessarily
Okay.
because you're going to reach a point where you're going to reach muscular and nervous system failure, right? And so when you're sprinting, you're not really reaching failure, especially if you're doing like 10-second sprints. You're not reaching failure, but you are maximally utilizing oxygen, and it's that
Okay.
maximum oxygen utilization that's creating such a potent stimulus. Now, I'm not saying that a heavy set of triple front squats isn't a super potent stimulus. It's just not going to be the most potent stimulus for and I think it really there's a depends here. If you're trying to get stronger, then that 1 to 3 rep range really is going to be probably your most potent way to get stronger because it really does hit the central nervous system side of that equation. But if
Yeah.
your goal is to build muscle mass, then the 1 to 3 rep range is not, it's too heavy to maximally stimulate mechanical tension, which is what is required to drive hypertrophy. And
Right.
that is going to be it can be achieved kind of at any loading range or any rep range, but it's most effective in like 4 to 20 rep range,
Yeah.
training just shy of failure. And when I say failure, I mean like if you're watching someone lift, if you want to maximize hypertrophy, then you need to lift to the point that the lift is slowing down significantly and you get
Yeah.
to the point that you're truly grinding, where you're truly 1 rep or 2 reps away from failure. Those are the stimulative reps. Those are the reps that have enough tension on all the fibers
Yep.
in the muscle to actually stimulate mechanical tension induced hypertrophy. So if
Yeah.
that's what you want to do, you have to train to the point that like you've seen it with people on bench press where it's like they're going, the bar's moving, and then all of a sudden like one slows down a little bit, the next one slows down even more, and the next one it's like you're not sure they're going to get it. That's where the set needs to be done. If you go one more and you go to failure, it makes it so that there's fatigue that negatively influences each of the subsequent sets. And so you
Got
get fewer effective reps essentially that are creating mechanical tension.
it.
Hypertrophy is an interesting thing. So
Yeah.
trying to get stronger, 1 to 3 is probably like your most potent. If you're
Yep.
trying to build hypertrophy, whatever rep range is going to let you kind of get to that slow grind most effectively. And those are usually very stable exercises. So like a leg press is going to be better than a squat. I know that that's blasphemy for people that
Whoa.
are CrossFit, right?
Whoa.
But stability lets you create fatigue in a muscle fiber in a much safer way. Your nervous system recognizes when you got a barbell on your back that it's inherently unstable and
Yeah.
reduces muscle activation. So you get a little bit less mechanical tension at the end of the set. So like a leg press is probably better than for hypertrophy is probably better than a back squat.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, that is very blasphemous for the functional fitness world. You can't you
Yeah.
can't be
I
saying
wish
that.
I wish we had a leg press because I think we would be able to build squats way. I mean, do you think that like Louis Simmons and West Side guys, do you think they avoided using a leg press? Heck
No,
no.
no shot.
That was definitely part of their training. Why? Because it was an effective tool, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a huge problem in the CrossFit community. Like maybe it's a Glassman, originally a Glassman problem because there was this like battle between bodybuilding and CrossFit and powerlifting and CrossFit and weightlifting and CrossFit about which methodology was the best. But the reality is like there are better tools than the barbell for other purposes. Now, if you want to get better at CrossFit, do your freaking barbell CrossFit and do CrossFit, right? Like
Yeah.
that's going to be your best option. But if you're trying to maximize hypertrophy, there are better tools than a barbell for certain aspects of it.
So do you think so I want to hit on this. I think I know your answer, but I want to say it for the general person listening out there. I don't think you're saying throw the squat out entirely if your
Nope.
goal is to build muscle, but you are saying mix it in and make it heavy, like get into that rep range, like definitely put it in there, but don't make either one just the exclusive option for training. Is that fair to say?
100%. That's
Okay.
100% fair to say. And I think is the average person even trying to maximize hypertrophy? The average person isn't a bodybuilder.
Fair.
So keep in mind that like you don't have to use like the tool that maximizes hypertrophy. If your goal is just to have big legs, I got big legs and I squat. I don't even have access to a leg
Yeah,
press.
right.
So like you don't have to have a leg press to grow leg mass. Just if you're trying to maximize it as a bodybuilder, or you're trying to make your sessions as efficient as possible, then that would be the route you want to go.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm sure that's super helpful for someone out there. Um, so my other question was going back to the rucking, because I've had this thought before, and I don't know. I think it's true subjectively. I feel like it's true for me, but I'm curious your thoughts on it. Would rucking and running with weight, maybe running is a better question, like running with weight, do you think that translates over into being stronger in the gym with weight loads, or no? Do you like, because my thought is you're landing, it's intense, you have to be strong, you're carrying extra load, and I feel stronger when I go into my training sessions having done it, but I don't know if it's just in my head or what the research would say on that.
Yeah, so here's where this would be my perspective. I'm not going to base this on research. This is going to be based on my knowledge and experience. I would say that for a novice trainee, introducing a new novel stimulus like rucking might make them a little bit stronger. Might. For an advanced lifter, someone like a power lifter who is extremely well trained, already really strong, adding rucking might make them weaker, right?
Right.
Because then you're going to be detracting from uh, adapting to their strength training. Um, but I think in the end, does it matter that much for the average training, right?
Right.
It's like I don't think rucking is something that's necessarily going to make someone weaker. I also don't think it's necessarily going to be something that makes someone stronger. Now, if we're talking about, imagine I'm trying to like my dad who's never rucked before, and I would love to say he doesn't. Well, I wouldn't love to say he doesn't do strength training, but like let's imagine that he doesn't do any strength training. He
Yeah.
does. I got him on the kick a long time ago, and I was like, hey, Dad, I want to get you started with fitness. And I think a great tool for that, because it would address strength and some endurance, would be to do some rucking.
Yeah.
Because then we're loading the skeleton, we're loading the tissues. And like you said, every time they have a step, it's their body weight plus. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think they're going to build some muscle mass. They're going to adapt. They're going to get a little bit stronger. But once someone has been in the gym, like for 3-4 years, and on a good structured program, I don't think adding ruck running is going to do that much for their back squat, for example.
Right.
Maybe for like a lunge or a step up or something, they might feel more comfortable with that.
Sure.
Um, but I don't know if it's going to necessarily make them stronger per se.
Yeah. Do you think that doing a lot of running, do you think that doing a lot of running and rucking in general is as bad for your joints as they say? Because I've never really noticed it, and I've done a lot of running.
I think a lot of it's weight dependent, how heavy you are, and also just like what your frequency is and how progressive you are with it. I think really heavy rucking can be pretty bad for your joints.
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of compressive forces. But I also think that the speed at which you're doing it has a big impact. So like if you're trying to do a 5 mile ruck as fast as possible, that's very different than walking 5 miles with load.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there's always going to be a little bit of there's two sides to the argument there.
Yeah.
Um, I do think that if you look at injury statistics, like injury statistics in running are really high.
Yeah.
You know, but that's also there's a lot of people who run, and so and there's a lot of different body types that run, and
There's a lot of poor
I think
technique too.
yeah, and I think for someone who weighs 125 pounds, running's not that damaging because you weigh 125 pounds, just not a ton of stress on each step.
Yeah.
But I think someone who weighs 205 pounds, like that's a lot of stress on every step. But also we use other tools. This is kind of like the leg press analogy. We use other tools to let us get away with running without injury. Like I use an assault runner twice a week and just do one long road run because the assault runner is just way less stressful on my joints.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a tool that you can use to mitigate some of that. You know, you can also do things like sand running or soft surface running. There were a lot of college track and field programs that have people do barefoot running on the infield
Yep.
and things like that as just tools to make sure that you're not always just getting pounded, on a hard surface. And I think that's another thing is like having some surface variability can help improve can help to improve injury risk. Now you got to be a little bit careful. Like remember that trail we ran for one of the camps that was
Oh
over
yeah.
in Roswell? That
Oh
one
yeah.
was a little bit sketchy.
That's
Just
crazy.
a little bit sketchy. So just be smart about it. But I don't think that running is inherently dangerous. I think I'm born to run. I read that book years ago, and I still think that humans in general are kind of built to run and run with some load and carry load. The idea that we aren't made to move with load, like how did we carry children?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. 100%.
How did you guys if you think back to like human ancestry, if we brought down a big old moose and chopped it up, no matter what, you're carrying 60, 70 pounds of meat back to wherever your camp is. So
Yep.
like we're built for it.
Yeah. You got
We're
to.
built for it.
Yeah, that is crazy to think about, dude. Have you ever watched that show Alone?
Oh yeah.
Dude,
Oh yeah.
I think it was I forget what season it was. It might have been the 100-day challenge. The guy who won when he killed the muskox. Did you
Oh
see
yeah,
that?
I saw that one. Killed it with a knife, dude.
Dude, that guy was. As soon as he did that, I was like, he's gonna win. 100%, he's
He
winning.
got it.
But man,
We
he
just
had to
watched.
chop that thing up, and he had to make several trips back to camp, and they're carrying. I mean, it's like, dude, you got to
Yeah.
be
Oh,
strong.
and you're probably already tired and underfed. So like that task is probably 5 times harder with it being in the environment that they were and like the condition that they were in. Man. And that's where we came from.
Yep.
And then we're sitting here complaining about getting our steps in for the day. Ugh.
I know, right? We've been domesticated, a little too domesticated.
We live in a
Um,
strange time in a strange world,
yeah, 100%. That's a whole. We could have a whole another podcast on that too. Jeez.
for sure.
Um, so how important for you specifically, and maybe you can share it with the audience too, is I like to call it training accessory work. So I classify, for me personally, I classify accessory work as like anything that's unilateral, usually like your dumbbell work, your lunges, your Cossack squats, your single leg RDLs. For me personally, I love that stuff. I feel the strongest and the healthiest when I do a lot of that. Have you noticed that for yourself? And do you do a lot of that? Do you give it to your clients?
I give it to my clients extensively. I like to think of it as assistance work, or
Yeah.
accessory work's probably another good way to put it. But I like to think of it as assistance because it falls into that category because it's not main training. And main training are things that are meant to improve performance in the sport or towards the goal that my client is working towards. So if they're a high rocks athlete, that's running, wall ball, lunging, all the component, rowing, skier, the things that are part of high rocks. If they're a CrossFit athlete, it's weightlifting, gymnastics, monostructural stuff, all those things. Those are main training components. And anything that's not a main training component, but is meant to support that is assistance work in my
Mm-hmm.
mind.
Yep.
And yeah, I think that assistance work or accessory work, whatever you want to call it, is a huge component of staying healthy long term in training.
Yeah.
For myself, it just depends on time frames. I tend to lump more of that for myself in my off season, where I have more time to dedicate to that. And when I'm in season phases, it's very focused on just sport movements as specific as I can make it. And so be, because I consider myself a competitor, at least I don't know if I would call myself an athlete. I don't have the schedule to be able to dedicate myself the way that an athlete would, but I'm a competitor. I'm very focused in season on the things that drive improvement for the sport. And then in the off season, I'm all about rebuilding good healthy joint structure and balance and
Yep.
things like that, maintaining mobility and setting myself up so that I can have another good season the next time. I a lot of the athletes I work with are athletes, and so they have time to build that assistance and accessory work in after a session. They have 2 hours to complete a session. I have 45 minutes. So I got to be very like in, done, and
Yeah.
out and moving on. So I would love to say that I do more of it than I do, but it really for me is about restoring me to health after a competitive season. But that's just based on the limited time frame that I've got.
Yeah. So if you have a client that only has 45 minutes, you you would rather give them sprint intervals and like squatting, for instance, rather than mixing in like heavy lunges or split squats. Is that how you would train them, or like what would that look like? I'm
So
genuinely
let's
curious.
let's let's imagine a client that has 3 45-minute sessions per week, right? I feel like that's a pretty typical availability for somebody today, right?
Yeah.
Um, the first session would probably be some accessory work as warm up. They might have Cossack squats and McGill hip airplane superset as A1, A2. And then we would do, just as an example, we'll do heavy back squats. I would pick back squat because it's a heavy structural lift. Front squat, weights are going to be a little bit lighter. Overhead squat, way lighter.
Yeah.
So we'd pick a heavy back squat because it's going to give us the most loading. We're looking for best time efficiency here. Then after the back squats, we would probably do a series of sprint intervals. It might be every 90 seconds for 10 sets. So that would be about 15 minutes, a 10-second max effort sprint, and then spin easy for the remaining time. That way they're capturing some of the steady state adaptations, which tends to be more blood vessel growth. And then they're getting that really potent stimulus from the sprinting.
Yeah.
And then we would spend the last 5 minutes doing like a down regulation breathing, because when else for the average person are they ever going to take a second to like prop their feet up and do 5 minutes of like deep diaphragmatic box breathing or something like that?
Yeah.
So that
No.
would be their 45 minutes. Yeah. So now you at least, if you do that, and you do that after every session, you've got 15 minutes in the week, right? Session two. Now, ideally, this would be a multi-body split. So like we would do back squat and we do maybe like dumbbell shoulder press, like seated dumbbell shoulder press, because I would want to combine upper and lower within every session. Because
Sure.
if you only have 3 days per week, you don't want to just do legs, just arms, just legs.
Yeah.
Second day would probably be similar accessory work to start, and then probably deadlift and some pulling, and then some kind of sprint interval. Maybe they might be longer. That might be 30 on, 15 seconds off. So more in the hit structure and less in the sprint interval structure. And then on the last day, it would be something similar. Maybe unilateral, might be front rack, split squats combined with trying to think what would be another good upper body piece to put there. Might even be like a superset of dumbbell incline bench and one arm dumbbell rows as like the upper body strength work, and then sprint intervals. And
Yeah.
that would be their 3 45-minute sessions. That it's not going to maximize hypertrophy. It's not going to maximize conditioning, but it's going to touch on all the pieces and fit them in the windows that they've got, and not leave out any aspect of fitness that's really important for
Yeah.
someone just to feel generally fit and healthy.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I'm sure that's really helpful for somebody out there. It's a tough balance because in a perfect world, we'd get them in there 5 days a week for 45 minutes, or 5 days a week for an hour and 15. We could squeeze in a little bit more, but the reality is, I mean, they're just busy.
People are
Like,
busy. Yeah, there's no
would
getting around
you
it.
would you choose? I'm actually really curious your thoughts on this. Would you choose kettlebell and dumbbell work over barbell work for somebody, or no? My opinion is no. I think barbell is far too important, but I'm curious your thoughts.
I mean, I think first off, it depends on the individual and their training stage and training age. With more advanced lifters, I'm going to go with the barbell just because we can load so much heavier.
Yeah.
Um, with more novice lifters, we'll go with the kettlebells and dumbbells all day. They're less intimidating. It's easier to learn. They're easier to stabilize. With like a single dumbbell in a hand and holding on to the rig with the other hand, they could do split squats very early on and feel
Yeah.
confident and comfortable with loading. And I think I would eventually progress someone to barbell. I started coaching one of my neighbors, and who I think at the time was 12, and my daughter, who at the time was 11, doing some CrossFit and some strength training. And we started with kettlebells and dumbbells, but they
Awesome.
eventually were, dude, they were weighing 100 pounds, deadlifting 155, and like we got their cleans up into the like 80-pound range, like almost body weight cleans at 12. But like it was a slow process. That was like an 8-month progression from learning a kettlebell swing to hitting a squat clean,
Oh, that's
right?
cool.
And
Wow.
like the reality is it's a slow process. So it would depend on where someone's at, but I think in the end the barbell just allows so much more loading, that if someone's like, hey, I want to get stronger and build some hypertrophy, then I would always try to move people towards the barbell. But that right there might just be me showing my CrossFit bias, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. I was just curious your thoughts because I mean, all over social media, I mean, the kettlebell dumbbell training program influencer thing. I mean, it's just massive right now, and I think it's because it looks really cool. Like anybody doing kettlebell stuff, it just looks cool. But
Yeah.
two, to your point, it's a far less intimidating, and you can do it anywhere, and so people are very attracted to it. I just think it's important for people to realize, like, yes, it's amazing. If you could only use kettlebell and that's really all you have, like you're doing something, that's great. But at the end of the day, if you can progress to using a barbell, I would do that because you're just going to get more out of it, and maybe you combine the two. Like
Yeah.
that would be
I
my
don't think that I don't think that there's like one best tool or anything like that. I think every tool has a very unique place in training. And each movement is probably going to have one piece of equipment that's going to be a little bit better suited for it. Like if you think about front squats, kettlebell front squats suck. Like they're
dude.
so hard.
Especially when you do it right and you hold it down low.
Yeah, they're so hard, but they're not hard on your legs.
Yeah.
They're hard on your midline and your ability to maintain a rigid torso.
Yep.
So, like, if you have someone who's struggling to maintain a rigid torso, I think about this, of course, from the sport performance side. If I have someone in CrossFit who's like tipping forward on their front squats and their thrusters and things like that, well, then I'll give them double kettlebell front squats to help address some of that issue. But if you want someone to build leg mass, quad mass with front squats, kettlebells are a really bad choice because they're going to be limited by getting tipped forward, and a barbell is a much better choice
Yeah.
for that. So whenever I'm thinking about equipment, I'm always thinking about what am I trying to get out of this piece of training for this person, this client, this athlete, and then try and choose the best piece of equipment based on what the intention and the goal is.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Um, I want to hit on this. We can do it real quick, even though I know it's not a quick topic at all, but I would love to hit on it. Is the blood flow restriction?
Oh yeah.
Because I know you are huge on that. I think people are asking you about it a lot. I see clips all over social media and you chatting about it. But I think it's interesting, and I think it's worth talking about. Like, how much blood flow restriction do you do, and how much do you give to your clients?
Well, here's another big depends
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
I try to get. Well, let me back up. What is BFR? So first off, blood flow restriction training is basically using a either elastic bands or an inflatable kind of tourniquet style cuff to reduce the amount of blood that's flowing into a limb and reduce the amount of blood that's coming out of the limb. So applied correctly, you are preventing blood from getting out of let's say you put it at the top of you always put it at the proximal portion of the joint. So like if you put it on your arms, it's like it goes up here. If you put it on your leg, you put it up, as high up into the hip crease as you can get on either side. And it's going to prevent blood from coming out of the leg, and some blood will get in. So over time, you're basically like inflating the leg like a balloon or the arm like a balloon. So it's building up a ton of blood and fluid within the tissue. What
yeah,
that does, um, it reduces the amount of oxygen that's available to the muscle, and it just creates fatigue faster. And by creating fatigue faster, you make it so that you can use lighter loads and lower intensities and get the same physiological stimulus that you get from heavy loads and high intensities without having to use heavy loads or high intensities.
wow,
So it's an awesome tool for people who want efficient training. So that's something I've been touching on frequently in here. People have limited time frames. You can get a lot of adaptation in a much shorter window. If you want to get a lot out of, say light to moderate loaded squats. Say you're traveling, you don't have any load, you don't have any weights with you. You didn't bring your kettlebell. But
Yeah.
if you bring your BFR cuffs, you can do like 30 squats, rest a minute, 15 squats, 15 squats, 15 squats, and be done. And you can get hypertrophy from that. You can get stronger from that. Your legs will grow doing
Wow.
body weight squats with BFR. It's a very unique tool because it basically, I think of it as like an amplifier of a training stimulus. So it
Yeah.
takes whatever you're doing and just turns the volume up to 11. Um, that's
Man.
probably the best way to think about it. So integrating it, I integrate blood flow restriction training as frequently as possible. I do a 10-minute bike afterwards at 55% of my occlusive pressure. So basically, there's a way to measure what the pressure that cuts off all blood flow into the limb. And then I'm
Yep.
using 55% of that pressure. So I'm reducing blood flow by about 45%. If you think about it, it's not exactly like that, but it's a way to think about it. And then I'm just riding the bike at what would basically be like a zone 2 pace. It's
Yeah.
not exactly zone 2. I take my pace from zone 2 and ride at that. My heart rate's a little bit higher. That's really complicated. I'm not going to go into why your heart rate's higher. There's less
Yeah.
blood going back to the heart, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I try and do that as quickly as possible. And
Yeah.
it's 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes is it's kind of the equivalent of doing a long zone 2 session. Because what you get out of doing like a long zone 2 bike is you get this increase in capillary growth. Your blood vessels, there's this big stimulus to grow blood vessels, but it takes 45 to 90 minutes on the bike to get that stimulus. But with BFR, like I said, it turns the volume up. So you do your 10 minutes of BFR bike, and you're getting basically the same equivalent stimulus that you would get with like 45 to 90 minutes of the bike at the same intensity.
Man.
So that's where I'm using it, is just as a way for me with a very limited amount of training time to get essentially like a zone 2 type adaptation in
Yeah.
10 minutes.
No, that is
Um,
so
with
cool.
with my athletes, I use it in a variety of ways. When people are injured, we use it to let them, train with light weights while they're rehabbing and maintain muscle mass. When people are in deload weeks and we don't want to, put really heavy loads on their backs and things like that, we'll use BFR to have a light day. For athletes that need to get stronger, who also need to put on a little muscle mass, we'll add some BFR hypertrophy finishers, kind of assistance or accessory work like we talked about, to just grow some muscle mass, because the thicker a muscle is, the more force it can produce. So we use it in those areas. And then on the endurance side, we're doing some of the protocols I don't want to talk too much about because they're things that I've developed that I
Oh
think are a
yeah.
competitive advantage for us, but we're using them on the endurance side beyond just this 10-minute bike protocol. But I think for the average person, man, it's tough. So to decide whether or not the average trainee would benefit from BFR it's a really difficult discussion, because on the one hand, they don't need it. You don't need BFR to get training stimulus, but BFR can make training stimuli more efficient. So if you're super limited on time, it might be something to look into, but they're also expensive, right? A good pair of effective BFR cuffs is going to run you $400.
Wow.
But if you look at the research on BFR, it can provide around a 5% performance improvement. There are no other training tools that exist in the world that can provide an elite athlete, a well-trained athlete, with 5% performance improvement. And they're constantly spending money on creatine and beta alanine and all this other stuff that might show a 1% improvement in performance. So the argument for an elite athlete is easy. You're like, hey, how much you spend per year on creatine? Oh, you spend $600 a year on creatine. Well, you could do a one-time investment in BFR and get 5 times as much performance improvement from integrating this into your training versus this. For an elite athlete, it's a no-brainer,
Yeah.
right? We're already like, I'm spending all this money on other stuff that's barely helping me, and I can spend money on this that'll help me a ton. I'll go with it. For the average trainee, dude, just train,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Be consistent. Like, there's so many other things that you can do outside of buying BFR cuffs that are going to be really effective for you, that like it doesn't justify the cost. But for people that hey Kyle, where'd you go? Well, not sure what Kyle went on that, but it's been a good podcast.
There we go. You still there? You still there?